there would not be any compensation adjustment for the current year. Julian Thorne spoke the words flatly, without any hesitation. He slid a single-page document across the conference table and leaned back, crossing his arms as if the meeting were over. I looked down at the paper, staring at the zero again. For the third consecutive year, my hard work had been met with the same circular response. I had anticipated some resistance, but I had not expected him to dismiss the entire past year of my life with such cold indifference. There was no apology offered, no discussion of market rates, and no acknowledgement of the targets we had smashed. It was simply a printed page informing me that my 9 years of dedication had yielded nothing but the status quo. Strangely, I did not feel the heat of anger rising in my chest. Instead, a sudden and profound sense of clarity washed over me. My name is Miriam Fletcher. I was 41 years old, and for 9 years I had served as the Senior Director of Strategic Accounts at Crestview Advisory Group. That title sounded grand in industry press releases, but in practice, it meant I was the one who carried the heaviest burdens, managed the most volatile clients, and solved the problems that others abandoned. I was the person who stayed late to clean up executive messes, only for senior partners to claim the glory when the accounts stabilized. I personally managed 31 of our largest corporate client portfolios. 27 of those major accounts had renewed their contracts during the previous 12 months under my watch. I had personally protected more than $18 million in annual recurring revenue for Crestview. We had just achieved our highest client satisfaction scores in nearly a decade. This was not a conversation about a poor performer who needed to prove her worth. This was about a business that had grown comfortable using my loyalty for free. Julian folded his hands on the table, offering a patronizing smile. Miriam, I want you to understand that this decision has absolutely nothing to do with your performance, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. That comment almost made me laugh out loud. If my performance is not the issue here, Julian, then what is the problem? I asked, keeping my voice even. His mouth tightened into a thin line for a brief second before he recovered his composure. You are already very well compensated for an account support position, he replied, shifting his weight. Account support. The phrase felt like a deliberate insult. 3 weeks prior to this meeting, I had spent 14 hours straight renegotiating a distribution contract that Julian had nearly ruined by promising a delivery date our manufacturing division could not support. 2 months before that, I had boarded a late-night flight on a Sunday because a major healthcare client was preparing to cancel their 7-figure contract after another partner had ignored their complaints. Yet, in Julian's mind, he was the visionary creator of business, and I was merely the support staff who kept the lights on. Your current compensation package remains highly competitive in this market. Julian continued, his voice smooth and empty, and you must remember that stability itself has a very real value. In times like these, a lot of professionals would be deeply grateful just to have your position. There it was. He was not offering respect or recognition. He was offering a warning disguised as advice, telling me I should feel lucky to have a desk. I had heard variations of this speech in previous years, but this time it did not sting. I had stopped needing him to validate my value. Do you anticipate my responsibilities changing in the coming year? I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on him. Julian gave me the tired smile of an executive who believed he was managing a difficult child. Your role is successful because you are good at maintaining personal relationships, Miriam. But we must not confuse customer relationships with contract ownership. The clients belong to Crestview, not to you. The conference room became entirely quiet. The sound of rain tapping against the glass wall behind him seemed to grow louder. I noticed his untouched cup of coffee, the steam no longer rising from it. I could tell he was waiting for me to argue, to plead my case, and to list my achievements. Normally, I would have. I would have pointed out the renewals, the saved revenue, and the clients who refused to speak with anyone but me. Instead, I simply nodded. I understand, I said. Julian blinked in surprise. He had prepared for a long debate, and my quiet acceptance caught him off guard. I signed the acknowledgement line on the letter, not because I agreed with the terms, but because it documented that I had received the news. Then I stood up, thanked him for his time, and walked out. What Julian did not know was that Pinnacle Consulting had approached me 3 weeks earlier. They wanted me to join them as their vice president of client strategy. I had not accepted their offer immediately because a part of me still believed that 9 years of loyalty to Crestview had to mean something. I had wanted to give my current employer one last chance to show they valued my work. Julian had just given me my final answer. I walked back to my office, shut the door, and opened the digital offer letter on my personal phone. It promised a higher base salary, a substantial performance bonus, real executive authority, and a dedicated budget to build my own team. I typed a brief message to the managing partner at Pinnacle. I am ready to accept. I sent the message. There were no dramatic scenes, no shouted arguments, and no warnings. Julian would still control my daily schedule for the next 30 days, but he no longer held any power over my career. 2 days after my annual review, Crestview distributed a company-wide email announcement at exactly 9:12 in the morning. I was in the middle of reviewing a renewal proposal when the notification popped up on my desktop screen. The subject line read, "Leadership Update inside the Client Growth Organization." I clicked it open and read the text. Brandon Cole had been promoted to Executive Director of Client Growth. I stared at the screen as the words blurred together. Brandon had been with Crestview for only 3 years. I was the one who had trained him when he arrived. The strategic review templates he used were formats I had designed. The client risk dashboard he presented to the board was a system I had built. Even the quarterly check-in meetings that Julian praised him for had been copied directly from my daily routine. A few minutes later, Julian stopped by my office door, leaning against the frame with an insincere smile. "I assume you saw the news about Brandon," he said. I looked up from my laptop. "I did see it, yes." "Excellent," Julian replied, stepping into my office. "I would like you to help him transition into the new role over the next few weeks. I want to make sure he has everything he needs to succeed." The level of disrespect was almost impressive. I looked at Julian and kept my expression completely blank. "What exactly would you like me to transition to Brandon?" I asked. Julian hesitated for a moment. "Well, the strategic relationships, the renewal calendar, and the key client histories. You know the nuances of those accounts better than anyone." Yes, I did know them, and Brandon did not. That afternoon, the lingering sting of the denied raise vanished, replaced by a sharp focus. Brandon was skilled at creating slide decks and using corporate buzzwords, but he did not know the actual people behind the contracts. He did not know that the chief executive officer of our largest manufacturing client hated surprise price increases, or that our healthcare clients required immediate communication during service outages. He did not realize how many of those executives called my personal phone before they ever thought about contacting Crestview. That evening, I met with Pinnacle Consulting's lead attorney to review my employment contract. My confidentiality obligations were absolute, and I had no intention of violating them. However, there was no non-compete clause in my agreement, and the non-solicitation restrictions were very narrow. I made a firm decision that night. I would take absolutely nothing with me when I left. No files, no client lists, no proprietary pricing data, and no contact information. I would not give Julian a single shred of evidence to claim I had stolen company property. I would walk out the door with nothing but my name and my reputation. I wanted to see what Crestview would look like when 9 years of built trust walked out the door with me. Over the next 2 weeks, I began looking at my portfolio through a different lens. On paper, Crestview owned the contracts. In reality, those contracts survived because I had spent years building trust and fixing mistakes. I remembered a crisis with a major manufacturing account 2 years prior. Crestview had delivered a flawed financial report just 48 hours before the client's board meeting. The chief operating officer had called my personal phone at 6:20 in the morning. He did not call Julian. He called me because he knew I would fix it. I spent 10 hours coordinating with our data teams, corrected the errors, and delivered the clean report before their meeting. The client stayed with us because of that effort. Another account, a large regional healthcare group, almost canceled their contract after Julian approved a steep rate increase without consulting them first. I spent weeks negotiating an alternative structure that saved the relationship. These clients did not stay because of Crestview's brand. They stayed because I was there to absorb the damage caused by executive decisions. As I prepared to leave, I quietly reviewed the upcoming renewal dates in my head. 18 major accounts were scheduled for renewal within the next 90 days. Another 7 accounts had contracts containing termination for convenience clauses, allowing them to leave with 30 days of notice. I did not write these dates down, nor did I copy any files. I knew the details by heart because I had lived them. Pinnacle's legal counsel reminded me that I could not encourage any client to leave Crestview or break their active contracts. I assured them I would follow the rules to the letter. I wanted this transition to be completely clean, without a single gray area. I also knew that Julian was planning to introduce a new pricing model that would increase fees while reducing senior account support. I had warned him in writing multiple times that this strategy would alienate our most loyal clients. Julian had ignored my warnings, replying that clients bought the Crestview system, not individual attention. He told me to stop over-personalizing the accounts. I did not save copies of those emails, but I knew they remained in Crestview's servers. The record of my warnings was permanent, and Julian was about to discover what happens when the person who solves all the problems suddenly stops standing in the way of his decisions. I did not submit my resignation immediately after accepting the offer from Pinnacle Consulting. I waited until every detail of my new role was finalized and my transition plan was prepared. I knew Julian Thorne would react with anger and try to control the narrative, so I made sure he had no ammunition to use against me. I went through my office slowly, packing only my personal notebooks, family photographs, and my own coffee mug. Everything that belonged to Crestview remained exactly where it was. I did not download files, copy databases, or export my professional contacts. I also compiled a private record of my personal employment history, including my past compensation letters and performance reviews, which I was legally allowed to keep. The documents showed a clear and undeniable pattern, year after year of stellar performance reviews, followed by 0% salary increases. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I walked into Julian's office and handed him my resignation letter. He read the short document twice, his expression hardening with every passing second. "You are resigning?" he asked, looking up with genuine shock. "Yes, I am," I replied calmly. "Where are you going?" "I will be joining Pinnacle Consulting," I said, his face flushed with anger. "That is a direct competitor, Miriam. You understand that our clients are strictly off-limits to you." "I understand my legal obligations completely, Julian. I will not be soliciting any Crestview clients," I replied. "You cannot take any of our data or intellectual property," he warned, leaning forward. "I have not taken a single file," I answered, meeting his gaze. Julian stared at me, clearly frustrated by my calm demeanor. He then tried a different approach. "Miriam, perhaps we can find a way to resolve this. I can speak with the partners about a salary adjustment." He named a figure. It was higher than the raise he had denied me just days earlier, but it was still significantly below Pinnacle's offer. The sudden shift in budget was almost comical. He went on to argue that Pinnacle was a smaller, less stable firm, claiming that their client-focused model would fail under market pressure. He told me that I was making a critical mistake and that I would regret leaving the security of my current position. "So the budget did exist after all?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "This is a retention conversation, Miriam." "No, Julian. This is a resignation," I said, refusing to back down. Julian accepted my resignation, but the next morning he informed me that my notice period would be cut short. Instead of 4 weeks, I would have only 2 weeks to transition my portfolio to Brandon Cole. I knew he wanted to prove that I was easily replaceable, so I spent the next fortnight documenting every active project, renewal timeline, and client issue. I did not hide any information that belonged to Crestview. However, Brandon quickly realized that spreadsheets could not replace years of personal interaction. He had never managed a real crisis, and his reliance on corporate templates was useless when dealing with frustrated clients. He came into my office one afternoon, looking stressed as he flipped through an account file. "What is the negotiation style of Simon Vance?" he asked, referring to the chief financial officer of our largest manufacturing client. "That information is not in the official account notes," I replied. I know it isn't, Brandon said, sounding annoyed. That is why I am asking you. What makes him move during contract discussions? I looked at him. Simon Vance does not like corporate buzzwords, and he values direct honesty above all else. I would suggest relying on the documented contract history, Brandon. Brandon stared at me, realizing that I was not going to give him a simple shortcut. He wanted me to hand over 9 years of accumulated instinct, the subtle cues I had learned to read, and the personal trust I had built. He wanted to know which executives preferred phone calls over emails and which ones needed weeks to process pricing changes. None of that could be copied and pasted into a transition document. It had to be earned, and Julian had already declared that my experience was just account support. During the final week of my transition, I sat in on a conference call with our largest distribution account. The client immediately noticed that I was silent while Brandon attempted to lead the discussion. When Brandon used a series of vague phrases to explain an operational delay, the client representative stopped him mid-sentence. He asked directly if I was still overseeing the account strategy. Brandon stumbled over his response, claiming that he would be providing enhanced corporate support. The client was not impressed, and the silence on the line was deafening. On my final day at Crestview, there was no farewell announcement or parting gift. Julian made sure my departure was as quiet as possible. I carried my single box of personal belongings out of the building, returned my security badge to reception, and walked through the glass doors. I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders as I stepped onto the street. 3 days later, Pinnacle Consulting announced my new role on their professional network. Within 24 hours, 6 of my former clients sent personal messages congratulating me. I replied to each one with simple gratitude, keeping my messages professional and brief. Then a message arrived from the director of a major healthcare account, asking who would be managing client strategies at Pinnacle. I immediately forwarded the email to our legal team. The clients were beginning to make their own choices. My first month at Pinnacle Consulting was focused on building the client strategy department from the ground up. The leadership team gave me the resources and authority I had lacked for years. However, I remained extremely cautious about any contact with Crestview clients. Pinnacle assigned a dedicated legal specialist, Donald Vance, to monitor my communications. If a former client reached out to me, I did not reply until the message had been reviewed and approved by our attorneys. I maintained a strict policy of zero solicitation. I never initiated contact, never sent promotional materials, and never suggested that anyone leave Crestview. We made sure every single interaction was fully documented in a secure compliance folder. On one occasion, a client sent a friendly congratulations email, and Donald made me wait 6 hours before responding, simply to ensure that my short response was completely free of any business discussion. Meanwhile, Julian was telling the Crestview partners that my departure was insignificant. I heard from mutual colleagues that he had claimed the business belonged to the firm, and that Brandon's scalable approach would improve efficiency. Brandon began contacting the accounts under my former management, but the response was far from positive. I received indirect updates that his calls were formal and transactional. One client sent me a brief text message stating that the atmosphere at Crestview had shifted dramatically. I did not probe for details. I simply wished them the best. A week later, an executive from our old regional healthcare account called my personal phone. She laughed during the call, mentioning that Brandon had congratulated them on being a Crestview client for 7 years. They had only been with the firm for 3 years. It was a minor mistake, but it demonstrated that Brandon was treating clients like data points on a spreadsheet. More importantly, Brandon had attempted to introduce Julian's new pricing model without addressing a long-standing service issue that had been troubling the healthcare team. In the past, I would have intervened to resolve the service issue before discussing pricing. Brandon simply pushed the new rates according to the corporate timeline, creating immediate friction. At Pinnacle, I focused on implementing a relationship-first strategy. We designed a model that limited the number of accounts managed by each senior director, ensured rapid response times for client issues, and established a rule that pricing discussions must be preceded by a service quality review. The president of Pinnacle was highly supportive of this approach, agreeing that clients rarely leave because of a price increase alone, but rather when they feel ignored. Then, the first major shift occurred. A former Crestview client, a large distribution firm managed by Sarah Jennings, contacted Pinnacle through our General Inquiries web portal. They stated that they were unhappy with their current advisory services and wanted to schedule a consultation. They specifically requested that I be included in the discussion. Sarah explained to our business team that Crestview had raised their fees by 15% while simultaneously reducing their contact point to an automated portal. Miriam listened carefully during the joint meeting, explaining Pinnacle's client-first service structure and emphasizing that Pinnacle assigns a dedicated analyst to every major account, ensuring that client calls are answered within 1 hour. Pinnacle's legal team reviewed the inquiry and confirmed it was entirely unsolicited. I joined the meeting and remained professional. I did not speak poorly of Crestview, nor did I mention Julian's pricing model. I focused entirely on Pinnacle's service structure and answered their questions. Within a week, they signed a new agreement with us, ending their contract with Crestview. Julian reacted with predictable anger. Within 48 hours, Crestview's legal counsel sent a formal letter to Pinnacle, accusing me of tortious interference and demanding that we preserve all communication records. Julian accused me of using proprietary client lists that I must have memorized, since the IT audit showed no downloads. Our legal team was prepared. We responded by providing the time-stamped portal inquiry, proving the client had initiated contact independently, along with our complete call logs. We pointed out that Sarah Jennings' company had been public about looking for a new advisory firm, making the accusation of using secret lists completely baseless. We showed that we had followed the non-solicitation guidelines perfectly. Julian had tried to intimidate us, but instead, he only succeeded in creating a formal record of our compliance. By the end of the second week, 3 more former Crestview accounts had reached out to Pinnacle. By the third week, the number had grown to 8. The clients were leaving because the service at Crestview was deteriorating under Julian's new pricing structure and Brandon's lack of experience. I did not have to convince anyone to leave. The clients were making the decision on their own, and Pinnacle was simply ready to receive them. By the end of the 6th week, 23 former Crestview clients had decided to move their business to Pinnacle Consulting. Some had already signed new agreements, while others were completing their contract notice periods. This represented a massive portion of Crestview's annual revenue. The sudden loss of these accounts sent shockwaves through the organization. Crestview's managing partners called an emergency meeting to address the crisis. Julian Thorne attempted to defend himself by claiming that I had orchestrated a massive client raid and stolen proprietary data. Brandon Cole supported his version of events, hoping to avoid blame for the loss of the accounts. However, Crestview's executive committee ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of my final weeks at the firm. The IT department reviewed my computer logs, email history, and file access records. They used advanced security software that checked for external USB drives, shadow backups, and hidden folders on my laptop. The forensic audit also highlighted that the IT systems at Crestview were completely secure, showing that our security culture was strong and that my team had always followed the highest standards of data protection. This detailed report was circulated to all managing partners, further validating my professional reputation. The results were conclusive. I had not downloaded a single database, copied any proprietary documents, or forwarded any confidential files. My departure had been entirely clean. At the same time, the board began receiving formal letters from the departing clients. The feedback was consistent. They were leaving because of the sudden increase in fees, the reduction in senior support, and the lack of communication during the leadership transition. The turning point came when George Albright, a senior partner at Crestview, discovered the email correspondence between Julian and me from months prior. I had warned Julian in writing that the new pricing model would drive clients away if we reduced their support. Julian's written response had been dismissive, stating that clients bought the Crestview brand, not individual attention. The board now had proof that I had anticipated the crisis, warned management, and been ignored. The narrative that Julian had constructed began to fall apart. George Albright presented a detailed timeline showing that every client who left had filled out a survey complaining about the pricing change. He showed that the revenue lost from these 23 accounts amounted to several $1,000,000. During the emergency board meeting, the partners presented the email chain to the committee. The other partners realized that Julian's arrogance had cost them their most profitable division. During the emergency meeting, the partners also discussed how much they had relied on my ability to smooth over difficulties. They realized that by treating strategic relationships as a simple transaction, they had lost the core value of their service model. The chairman of the board remarked that this was a costly lesson in executive humility. Julian could not explain why he had dismissed my warnings, nor could he explain why the IT audit showed no wrongdoing on my part. The evidence was clear. The clients had left because of Julian's decisions, not my actions. The board immediately stripped Julian of his management authority, placing him under a formal performance review. Brandon Cole was quietly removed from the client growth department and reassigned to a support role with no client contact. The transition they had claimed would be simple had cost the firm millions of dollars in revenue. Stonewall and Pinnacle continued to manage the transition of the 23 accounts smoothly. I focused on delivering the high level of service we had promised. We hired additional staff to manage the increased workload, ensuring that our new clients received the attention they deserved. I established weekly strategy meetings with my team at Pinnacle, mentoring young analysts and ensuring that the 23 clients felt the immediate difference in care. In my strategy meetings with the transition team, we spent hours reviewing the history of each incoming account. We wanted to make sure we did not repeat any of Crestview's errors and that we understood the unique requirements of each corporate partner. My team was enthusiastic about this relationship-focused approach, and their dedication was reflected in the positive feedback we received from the clients. I built the exact support structure I had advocated for at Crestview, and the results spoke for themselves. The clients were satisfied, and our retention rate remained perfect. Several months later, I sat down for my first annual review at Pinnacle Consulting. The president of the firm smiled as he opened my performance file. He did not offer any empty platitudes about loyalty. Instead, he presented a new compensation package that included a significant salary increase, a performance bonus based on the revenue we had secured, and expanded leadership authority. It was a professional acknowledgement of my value, based entirely on my contributions to the firm. We spent the afternoon discussing our plans for the upcoming year, and I felt a deep sense of pride in what we had accomplished. Looking back at my time at Crestview, I realized that Julian had been right about one thing. The contracts did belong to the firm. But he had forgotten that trust cannot be owned by a contract. Trust is earned through daily effort, honesty, and respect. I did not steal 23 clients from Crestview. I simply stopped protecting Julian from the consequences of his own arrogance. Once my loyalty was removed, the natural outcome followed. I no longer needed to ask for my worth to be recognized. My work had already spoken for itself.